Welcome to Brand News Podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Emily, a fashion podcast sharing news behind brands. Each episode, I'll speak to people from within the industry to get a better understanding of their job roles, as well as discussing the latest fashion news. Welcome, Zuzanna. Thank you so much for coming onto my podcast.
Hi, it's so nice to be on the other side for a change.
So nice. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. I think it's the kickoff of Fashion Week. We're in Berlin today. I think,
it's actually the kickoff of like a fashion year.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes,
yeah, that's true. You're the sustainability manager for Vogue Poland. As you said, you also have your own podcast, and you also organize the BFES, so the Business Fashion Environment Summit.
I know it's a bit of it doesn't really roll off your tongue easily. Yes.
No, right? Yeah.
Business Fashion Environment Summit, yes. But the name was forged before I joined the team, so yes. But it's very self-explanatory, right? Like you know what you're getting into right away.
Yeah.
There's no like mystery behind it.
I think everyone listening must know Vogue. I hope they do. But can you tell us a little bit about your role at Vogue?
Of course. So, as I've already mentioned, I joined the team because of the summit. I was actually asked to host the second edition, and I think I did such a good job that they've asked me to just run the conference, and I really loved having the freedom to just brainstorm ideas and invite whoever speakers I would love to see. And it's not very common for, magazines to have sustainability managers.
Yeah.
Right now, pretty much every other brand has like a sustainability officer.
Yeah.
Because you have to align you with, reporting. I mean, it really is the job of the future, but I feel like the magazines are lagging behind a little bit because so much of the messaging in the fashion industry has been, you need this, must have of the season, must, purchase, spend, acquire, get it. And my role is to balance some of that message with, kind of planting a seed of doubt. Do we really need that? Do you really need another handbag? But so I'm a little bit, playing devil's advocate at just trying to shift the narrative a little bit more and kickstart conversations that are sometimes missing from like mainstream publications. Because whenever you go to these incredible conferences on like sustainability, it features experts, but it kind of leaves out the public. Unless you like subscribe to Business of Fashion or Vogue Business, you won't necessarily find articles about climate urgency and, waste colonialism and all the things that we are responsible for in mainstream fashion lifestyle publications.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, that's basically what I do.
How's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. I, like I said, I also have my own podcast. So my role is to raise awareness, ask some difficult questions, because I feel like we're still in the phase of questions, less so the answers. Like we're really good at, pointing out what's wrong, but the solutions are still difficult to come by, which is also a surprise because this is such a creative industry, who else but like the designers, like you have this opportunity to not only design a product, but to design a product that meets certain challenges, that addresses the needs of a society. Like we shouldn't just think of what buyers want or need. We should think less so from the buyer's client's perspective, but more so from the society's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a really impressive CV.
Thank you.
I mean, I read somewhere in an article, it says model, activist, feminist. You don't necessarily have a background in fashion.
Well, it's interesting. I do not have an academic background in fashion. However, I've been in the fashion industry for over 2 decades.
Exactly.
You may be surprised, but I started very young. I was actually 13 years old when I was scouted as a model. I mean, that should be illegal. And it sort of is now. I mean, that was forever ago. And in some ways, I'm grateful that I wasn't right away, thrown to the big world, sent overseas to, walk in New York Fashion Week. It took me some time. I was 16, 17 when I started working in New York, Paris, London, and but I've always wanted to distance myself from fashion. I never took it seriously. I didn't think brought any value other than, allowing me to travel the world freely and gain independence from a very young age. I could also see the trappings of the industry.
Yeah.
And this is something that really didn't come to the fore until later. And I'm very grateful for my friends and colleagues, Sarah Ziv, the founder of Model Alliance, and also Cameron Russell, who took the Me Too movement from Hollywood and really, shown the spotlight on the issue within the fashion industry with the hashtag "My job should not include this abuse," and later starting a community of models. And it wasn't until we were able to see one another, to speak to each other freely about, abuses, about negligence, about, we often believe that things are the way they are, and this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
And if you want to change, I've heard from people, if you don't like it, why don't you just quit? But the challenge is to stay within it and take it on and try to change it from the inside. And that was the moment that I stopped being ashamed of doing the work that I was doing, and really took pride in who I am and what I've done up until this point. Even when I enrolled in university, I would be embarrassed to admit that I've had modeled all these years. And I started uni when I was actually 25. And I felt like I had this big gap in my resume. What were you doing post high school up until now? And, and I'd rather say that I was unemployed. I loved the idea of being a student, just not to say that I was a model, because people would instantly, typecast you as a certain person.
Do you mean that negatively?
Yes.
Yeah.
And even in the academic circles, people would say "Oh, but you're so smart for a model." What do you mean? What does, what do you think a model is? So I struggled with that a lot. And then it was very refreshing to meet other girls who had the same doubts and insecurities about the job, that would obviously, put your looks first.
Yeah.
But then with the rise of social media, we've also gained a platform to say something. We've gained a platform to mobilize. We've gained a platform to organize. And I think that was really liberating. And that was also the beginning of the end of a certain cycle of abuse where things would go unchallenged, uninterrupted, because that's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
So, call-outs of abusive casting directors, photographers, stylists, of, certain practices within modeling agencies. I mean, the thing is that models do not have a union. We have nowhere to turn to. in case your contract is terminated or you lose your visa because, you decide to speak about something that's inconvenient. So we were always beholden to agencies. And it wasn't really an equal working relationship, where you're being represented, but you were made to feel like you're one of many. And if you start complaining, if you're being difficult, then we're just not gonna propose you for jobs.
Yeah.
We're just gonna find someone who's willing to agree to everything.
This sounds really sad, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also empowering, when we were able to come together and speak about it openly. And like one of the things that glued us was not just the Me Too movement, but also this, realization of we are the face of the industry that is responsible for so much damage. We're literally selling our image to just push products that no one really needs.
Yeah.
So we also just started educating ourselves about sustainable fashion. This is like 8 years ago, when like sustainability was still wasn't so much of like I don't know if it's even anymore a buzzword. It just seems to have been so normalized.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Besides modeling, so that's what you said that you started out with, then you went to university. What did you study?
So it's funny because I actually went to the New School, which is like a big umbrella of different colleges underneath it. And one of them is actually Parsons School of Design, which is a world-known school of fashion, that like, Prenza Schuler, Marc Jacobs, Alexander Wang, many, many great people, Donna Karan. Actually, I had Diane van Furstenberg speaking at my graduation. So,
wow.
But I did not go to Parsons. I was very adamant about leaving fashion behind, as I didn't treat it seriously. It just seemed like, I wanted to be taken seriously. So I took up global studies, and then I did my master's in liberal studies. So I still found myself a niche of very non-descriptive and vague sounding degrees that allowed me to do whatever I wanted, from modern dance to sculpture to film classes. But really, I found my passion when it came to like social justice issues. And I would do many study abroad trips and researches. One in Amazon about indigenous communities running ecolodges and seeing, where the profits were coming to, about mining industries in the Amazon, about reconciliation in post-genocidal Rwanda. So a lot of it was, it was more like a human rights advocacy degree that just allowed me to open up my eyes and see those connections. But it was still very much removed from fashion. I did not see fashion as part of the puzzle in all of that. So I really love that now I can really merge the two worlds together, and and have found a really robust community of activists and change makers and disruptors within the fashion industry.
Yeah. Looking at your CV, I feel like that always, or that really tells what you just kind of recapped. So the background, starting in fashion and then doing something that doesn't really have anything to do with it, and then circling back to
seeing how it does. But of course,
exactly.
If we're talking about extractive industries, if we talk about conflicts, if we talk about, like I said, waste colonialism, something that I would love to come back to later, but maybe I would just mention one of the speakers at this year's Vogue Summit was Liz Ricketts from the Orr Foundation in Ghana. Liz has been working with the community at the Cantamanta market in Accra, which is the largest secondhand market in the world. Really an incredible creative energy of upcyclers and makers, but also a place that receives all the unwanted clothing from the global north. Just to give you an idea of how big of a scale this issue is Ghana, a population of about 33 million, weekly receives 15 million pieces of garments, of unused clothing, unused, worn, unwanted. Much of it actually comes from returns. So all of the unwanted Christmas gifts that, just end up being shipped to Ghana.
I know exactly what you're talking about because my family used to live in Accra, so I've seen it with my own eyes.
You've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, it's just gut-wrenching. Yeah.
How many years ago was that?
I would say 9.
Yeah. That's, I mean, the problem goes all the way back to colonial times when the export of clothing began, with this notion that whatever would come from the West was more desirable than like the wonderful local textile industry, and that just ended up decimating the local industry.
Yeah. It's painful to see the beauty of the industry that we all know and love, and then see something that back then didn't get any attention. But yeah, I was very well aware that I also worked in that industry, and then I would go on holidays to see my parents there.
So your parents actually lived in Accra?
Yeah, they lived in Accra.
This is amazing. Have you traveled there since? Or
no, actually, when they left, that was also the last time I went. Yeah. So,
it seems like the problem has gotten so much worse.
Yeah, I've heard around. And
I mean, like, we're talking, if you just want to visualize it, we're talking about just thousands upon garments, like cliffs of clothes. I mean, it's not even clothes anymore because
it's just dumped fabrics.
Fabrics, yes, that are
dirty. And,
up in flames, mixed with sand that pollute waterways, that end up in oceans, that really, really change the landscape of the place. And also with the influx of fast fashion, just the quality of clothes that are sent is decreasing. So really 40% of the clothes that get sent go straight to the landfill because there's nothing you can do with it. Doesn't matter how creative you get. It's just trash. It really is. And it's the trash that we're not willing to pay for in the global north because waste management is costly.
Absolutely.
So it's cheaper to outsource the problem and send it someplace else.
It's like putting blindfolds on.
Absolutely. You know, this is something that we very rarely take into account, is that what is the afterlife of your unwanted t-shirt?
Yeah, literally.
Like,
if you buy it and then wear it for a season, what happens to it then?
Yes, you know, and like you might think, well, I'm just gonna give it to the charity shop for the people in need. This is, you know, social activist within me, this idea of like people in need. It really triggers me because it's something I have also seen firsthand when the war in Ukraine started with, you know, Russia's invasion. I run a shelter for large families, women and children. I was lucky enough to be given a space, a former bar, and I called it a disco shelter because it still literally had disco balls hanging from the ceiling. And we were able to accommodate 20 families, 20 people, so 2-3 large families at a time. And whenever they would arrive, you know, we would have clothes for them to change into, like fresh underwear, socks, clothes, and everything. But I remember, you know, when we started a call asking people for like donations, it was middle of winter, and I remember someone just brought me like summer dresses for babies, and I could tell that someone was just going for their wardrobe and looking at the things that they no longer needed and thinking, I don't know what they were thinking, but like who would wear summer dresses in February, freezing temperatures? It was just people were giving their cast-offs, and people would actually donate like snorkeling gears and wedding gowns and whatever they no longer needed. It was just it was really offensive in that sense, just thinking that people in need
don't need a wedding dress.
Yes. Yeah. No, this is not your priority when you're escaping the horrors of war.
Your podcast is called Call to Action, and you mentioned earlier to me you started it when the war broke out. Can you tell us a little bit about the podcast?
Of course. Well, it was a very actually spontaneous call. It was at a time when Poland, with its history of war, migration, but also sadly a very xenophobic attitudes towards refugees, unlike Germany, which we neighbor. Surprisingly, we've opened our arms and welcomed, at the time, 3 million Ukrainian refugees. Many of them had ended up, returning or moving further into Europe and Canada and elsewhere. But at the time, really everyone was on board. And my idea was to speak to people who were actively involved, not just in helping refugees, but in really pushing the agenda and fighting for change and seeing what can we do to, help alleviate the pain, or sometimes it was your own pain, of like when you're feeling so helpless, when you're feeling so little, when you're feeling so useless. What can you do to get involved and make a difference? So that was the idea behind the Call to Action podcast, which now runs into its 4th season. And I really touch on subjects, from climate emergency to housing crisis to recent elections in Poland and mobilizing women, which we were lucky enough to not maybe overthrow, because that doesn't sound very democratic, but to outvote the right-wing party that was in power for 8 years. So it was just this idea to bring, again, social issues to Vogue listeners and beyond.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that, because it's amazing.
It's in Polish, so sadly you won't be able to engage.
Well, I'll support it anyway.
Yes, but to anyone interested, for instance, in the Business Fashion Environment Summit, all of our editions are available on YouTube, and there is hours and hours of incredible footage of amazing conversations, not just with Liz Ricketts from the Orr Foundation, but also Julie Pelipas behind the Better upcycling brand, who's really, really outspoken about the continuing war in Ukraine. She's actually from Mariupol herself, and just so many amazing people. Arizona Muse, Cameron Russell, who I have already mentioned, who has an upcoming book this year, giving you more insights about the industry and the ways that we need to fight for change. Aditi Mayer, who is my personal favorite, an incredible labor rights, sustainability activist and journalist, and based out of Los Angeles. Just all of those inspiring, incredible people that I've had a chance to interview and work with.
Yeah, amazing. So circling back to the BFES, it's a leading conference on sustainability, and it's organised by Vogue in Poland.
Vogue in Poland, in partnership actually with Boston Consulting Group, because beyond just the conference, every year we also release a report that goes more so into detail of the state of the industry.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because the topics that you cover are really big topics, I feel, in the industry. And I read, for example, in the last recap of your business report, that you really covered the diversity and inclusion issue, let's say, in the industry. And in the report are some really hard numbers. And I was quite shocked to actually see these numbers. One said that only 39% of women on boards within brands, so only 39% are women, but also that only 7% of board of directors are people of colour. These are big numbers, small numbers actually. I mean, big.
No, but these are stark inequalities.
Exactly, yes.
And it just goes to show that so much of what has to change is the culture.
Yeah.
And, the aspect of diversity and inclusion is both representative in the sense of what we see on the runway, what we see in ads, and that's actually changing rapidly. And that's partly to the backlash that's been in social media and very loud calling out. But what's behind the doors is equally as important. Because at the end of the day, so many of the controversies that bubble up just come from the fact that there was no one in the room that had a very different perspective and asked the question, like, is this really sound for us to release it right now? I'm referring to even, the latest controversy with Zara and their campaign, which is absolutely deaf tone, even if it was shot long before and had no connections whatsoever. You just don't put images like that in such a fragile moment when all the eyes are set on Gaza. Fashion is such a creative industry, but in order to foster that creativity, in order to foster that innovation, you just need a variety of different perspectives and lived experiences. And it cannot be the kind of dominant model. Even looking from the modeling perspective, having been in the industry for over 2 decades, I remember when I first started out, walking in my first fashion weeks, that was when all you had were cookie cutter, exact same models in all the same sizes, just white. Actually, from Eastern Europe, that was like the moment of just very lean, pale, blonde, skinny, absolutely. And there was just nothing exciting about that. There was no personality behind it. It wasn't something that anyone could really relate to. And I think it's so empowering to show different body types.
Absolutely.
To show, and it doesn't just come down to race, ethnicity, and size. It also comes down to people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
The largest minority in the world, and anyone at any point could have a disability. And adaptive fashion, I think, it really is an untapped side of the industry.
Yeah.
People in wheelchairs also want to wear cool, sustainable brands.
Shop at Zara.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah, maybe for someone listening who maybe missed what the Zara campaign was, or someone listening who doesn't work in fashion and kind of missed it, could you explain shortly what you meant?
Those were the images that I think were released late November.
Yeah.
And it showed a model in an artist studio, in a sculptor studio, but surrounded by figures, actually kind of broken cast figures with missing limbs, and some of the figures were wrapped in white cloth, very much reminiscent of the body bags we would see all over Gaza, all over the news, and it was just really uncalled for. There was nothing about the campaign, even from just a visual standpoint, that would defend their decision to ever go in that direction. And the company has obviously, backtracked and apologized, but this notion of being disconnected has just remained. And some people said that we're reading too much into it, but fashion is always in close response to what's happening.
Well, it's so relevant.
Of course. It's meant to be trend-setting, then what are we trying to say by releasing such images?
So circling back to the numbers that come through the BFES website, you publish them in articles or
reports.
In the reports.
Yes.
How does it actually feel from your standpoint in the job that you have as sustainability manager, and with the team, of course, that you work with? How does it feel publishing that report, and maybe the responsibility behind getting these numbers into the world?
Well, it's important that we have some evidence to look into, that this is not just anecdotal, that this is not just based of our ideas, but to see the progress, to track the progress, to see where we've been and where we're at and where we still need to go. I think it's really important to collect the data, to measure where we're at. Sometimes you also need these numbers to just see how far we still need to go. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I also read something which actually made me giggle on your Instagram. You said, from Accra to Seattle, the journeys might have been long, but the influence in the industry is boundless. You said about the past summit. You invite really big names to the summit, and also I saw Stella McCartney and
yes, Stella was there last year. Yeah,
so amazing, and the sustainability manager at H&M, and great big names. How do you decide who comes in and shines their light on the subject?
Of course. Well, I'm not going to lie that we are absolutely inspired and influenced by the Global Fashion Summit that takes place every year in Copenhagen, and now it's also taking place elsewhere. I think it was in Boston this year, in Singapore last year's editions. I think it really is one of the most inspiring events on sustainable fashion and beyond. And I've been watching closely what Global Fashion Agenda has been doing, and I also just love to listen to Claire Press podcasts. And it really comes down to me being hungry for more and just wanting to ask some of my own questions and meeting these people, and this insatiable curiosity of thinking, how can we make a difference? And even though Warsaw is definitely not Copenhagen, there is no comparing to that. But I think that we can bring some of our own unique perspective, and Like we're not trying to always catch up with the West. We have our own identity. We have our own struggles, certain ideas when it comes to upcycling, when it comes to making the most with the least, thinking of Poland's past and scarcity and living under the strain of communism, is that some of those ideas are really ingrained in us. So we're in a very different position when it comes to tackling overconsumption because, we have been mending and repairing long before repair was cool, just out of necessity. So I think it's cool to bring those speakers, many of whom I admire and I have a lot to learn from. But I think it's also great for them to see, where like Poland's at and how we do things differently.
Amazing. The past edition was in October 2023, and I think I read somewhere it was the 4th edition, right?
The 4th edition, and we have an upcoming one again in October 2024. So the summit is in English, and it really is a great opportunity to network and meet people and just engage in conversations. So I'm not quite sure if the date is set just yet, but it will likely be Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. So save the date, Warsaw, and we promise a lot of fun.
Amazing. I was going to ask, what do you think the future looks like? Because I feel, the 4th edition, it's not been around for so long, but you're obviously making noise. How do you see the future for it?
Well, sometimes it would be great to get out of the conference rooms and into the real factories, into the real landfills, into the real spaces. Yeah. So I would love to see something. Well, actually, me and you are currently meeting at the Seek Fashion trade show in Berlin, and I like the idea of having those two elements come together. Yeah. Of having vendors and of having like practitioners together with the experts. Yeah.
Trickling it down a bit more, do you mean?
Yeah. I think it's good to make it a little bit more so interactive. Yeah. A little bit more engaging for the audience. I think it's also great to, bring on board like young bloods and just students and, Gen Z who already think very differently. Although sometimes I think that they carry these two contradictions of being very climate conscious and only shopping secondhand, but at the same time they're really into quick changing TikTok trends and like Shein business models. So so I think it's important to be in tune with what the youth is after, because they will be the ones shape-shifting the future, and having a huge influence. One thing that I'm really excited about this year is that we're shifting away a little bit from the sponsored content and more so into authentic engagement and micro-influencing. And I also really love the trend of last year, which was de-influencing. But I think it's, I try to use my platform as a platform for good and for spreading awareness and raising some uncomfortable issues and confronting others with that. And hopefully that will continue.
Definitely. I feel like we could talk for another hour. But thank you so much, Zuzanna, and it's been an honor to have you on my podcast.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
It was such a
really
joy.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing a bit more about your journey toward where you're at now, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.